Hey guys, and welcome to the TCC podcast, where we discuss everything coffee. Hey guys, Theo here, and on my right
is Mr. Christian.
Mr. Pedante. Guys, welcome back to another fun episode. We're going very practical today.
Yes. Also, I think we're going to link it very well with our previous episode when we talked about our trip to the farm, and I think this was kind of inspired by a conversation that we had with regards to our trips to the farm, speaking to people, farmers, roasters, and even baristas.
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the effects, or what we found, with regards to temperature and grind size in brewing coffee.
Yes.
And how just changing that a little bit creates a completely different dynamic in flavor. And as we dive into this, let us take a look at the coffee that we are drinking today. Theo, since you have it in front of you, please tell us about the coffee.
Now, this coffee is going to feel like a little bit of a sin to most coffee drinkers. Did you just take a sip?
I did.
And I was actually hoping to give all of the information before you did, because it's mind-blowing. But okay, you're going to tell us exactly what you experienced. Yeah, but I was like, I hope we actually get to. Anyway, guys, so if you were on Instagram, if you're on YouTube, you would have just seen Christian's reaction, and I'll try and edit this out so we can actually put this on Instagram.
Yeah.
The specific reason why is the coffee today is actually very, very, very old.
Yes, it is very old.
And so that's the reason why we took this out. Now, I literally have probably another 20 grams left.
I think 15, not even 20.
15 grams left. There was only about 30 to 35, maybe 40 grams of this coffee left. And I've kind of forgotten about it. So the coffee that we are drinking is an Ecuador Gustavo Landiva.
Yeah, it would be Gustavo Landiva.
Okay, pronunciation right there. And it is from the Santa Isabel Abdon Calderon? How would you pronounce that?
I think it would be Abdon Calderon.
Okay, Calderon region.
Yes, but we do, like I said, with regards to any Spanish or Portuguese or any other language that we obviously don't speak, just throw it our way.
Right. Now, it's a Typica variety. It is a fully washed process. It was roasted, listen to this, the 19th of
July
2019. And it was roasted for filter by an amazing friend that I had the great opportunity of meeting, Mr. Ben. He is roasting champion 2018 in Australia, so Australian national barista champion. And that's actually one of the reasons why
roasting champion, not barista champion.
Oh, sorry, roasting
champion.
Did I just say barista?
Yes.
I mean roasting champion. I'll link him in the description. You guys can go and check him out on his Instagram. Phenomenal roaster. And if you're into movies, you would actually love this guy.
Oh.
He does personal expos. So he goes to personal expos that are movie marathons.
What?
So in Australia, they do these expos where movie fanatics come together, and they would movie marathon like 15 movies straight through, like
damn,
crazy. And he is one of those type of guys.
That just seems like a place where you can make a lot of money selling coffee.
Oh, definitely, man. I never thought of that.
I think you could sell a lot of coffee.
He goes there to watch the movies, but I'm sure he does like one or two things while he's there.
My goodness.
How would you pronounce Genovese?
I'm not even gonna try.
Anyway, so that's the roastery's name. I'll link them again in the description. It's a single origin Ecuador. I love Ben's roasting. He's a phenomenal roaster. It's genovese.com.au.
Yes.
From Melbourne is their head office. They're Sydney. So just website is genovese.com.au.
Yeah.
You guys can go and check them out there. They do phenomenal coffees. Ben will kick my rear end if he knows that I still have any of this coffee left.
Yes.
Because it is such a phenomenal coffee. Now, with all of that said, I want Tian to express what he just tasted.
Now, saying as well, since we are playing around with grind size and temperature, what we did with this coffee is very, very unorthodox. And if you take a look, if you go to our website and you go to the Medium article that we're right on this, you'll find we posted 3 different grind sizes. The one on the left being the one that we used, and very, very coarse. So we made this coffee in a Kalita. Using the wave filter.
Now, he chose a very strange method for this one because it's so hard to actually brew through the Kalita,
especially
if you don't have the right grind size.
Yes, and on an older coffee
and
as
it's an
well.
older coffee on top of that because it runs like crazy.
So this coffee ran extremely quickly. So what I did was I went and poured extremely slow. I think I averaged 1.9 grams per second with just a little bit of obviously rest in between, but it ran extremely. I poured really, really slow.
Only Pedanti could do this, man.
With the grind size being as coarse as it was, we pushed temperature. So we don't often go 91 degrees Celsius on a coffee. It gets bitter very, very quickly. But because of the grind size being as coarse as it was, that was what my reaction was. So on first taste, I'll just taste it again.
It's insane, man.
It is intensely sweet on the tip of the tongue with this almost red licorice kind of element in the center.
Plummy licorice, man.
Yes, plummy licorice with that beautiful stone fruit acidity on the side of the tongue. Beautiful, intense flavor coming through. And this actually being...
Is there a bit of pineapple in the back of the throat?
You know what? I get what you say. I think it's more like a synthetic pineapple. Or
fermented.
Or have you ever
pineapple.
had dried pineapple before? Have you eaten?
Yes, dried pineapple. My goodness, I was like, what's this thing in my throat?
Yes.
That's crazy. Sorry.
No, please. And so very, very hard on it to get all of those proteins and sugars and oils released, and then pouring extremely slow to get to 4 minutes 20 seconds. And now obviously you're thinking, all right, he said he poured very slow, but he only got to 4 minutes 20. That coffee ran like you would not believe. I had to slow it down so much. And we got such beautiful flavor, and which is so amazing because the coffee that we're using and how we extracted it intros completely into the episode and what we want to discuss.
Right. Even if your coffee is old,
yes,
if you play with your elements, you can still get a delicious cup of coffee.
And in just that regard, let's say even if this coffee was fresh, right? Going as coarse as we just did,
that's crazy coarse.
Compared to going a normal V60 or a finer grind that we would use normally for a Kalita, we would have a completely different flavor. We would get different elements of bitterness. We would get different elements of acidity. Time would obviously be adjusted. You would adjust flow of water.
Oh, definitely.
And also, the moment you go finer, I would not have gone 91 degrees Celsius on this coffee. You would get very stringent bitter elements out of this coffee.
Oh, for sure. If this was fresh, just the bloom would have released so much flavor that if you had to go this hot, this long, I think it would be horrible.
So that now obviously being said, we brewed enough experimental brews with coffee to know that we can kind of take this chance. Also, not knowing 100% that this was going to succeed.
Right.
So
we were experimenting, hoping.
Yes.
Going.
And even if I have to say, even if it was a horrible cup of coffee, it would still be something that we'd actually learned from.
Yes.
So we would know, okay, on this coffee, now we know that it is, I think it's a Typica, single varietal.
Single varietal, yes.
And it's a washed process. So you got, that clean, sleek kind of texture to it. So it's not that thick.
Very bright.
Yes.
And it's smooth but not creamy.
Yeah. So not like, for example, the natural process that we had on the last episode when we discussed farms. And And the farms then being an inspiration into this episode, because what I didn't mention very intentionally was that when we got to the coffee farm, and I started having conversations with Des on the Pignati coffee farm, I was a bit shocked by how few different ways Des has actually tried his own coffee at that point.
Yeah, well, 1 or 2 methods, because that's all he had.
And also not playing with ratios, not playing with grind size, and not playing with temperature. And so we actually took over the 3-4 days that we actually made coffee, just different grind sizes, different recipes, playing with different elements of the coffee to actually just show what a difference that can make.
And it blew his mind.
Yes, and the moment, for example, when I told the guy who was working on the farm at that point, who did not flash his heads, and also saying it wasn't a dual boiler machine, so his heads got extremely hot. And the moment we just cooled down the shots and we changed the recipe, we got completely different flavors.
Oh yeah, espresso's got so sweet.
Yes, and at that time a much darker roast profile on the coffees.
Yes.
So they've been playing with the coffee in a completely different way. And also, the moment you go, for example, let's say light roast, you can go a little bit hotter and play with temperature and grind size just to get a completely different flavor. But for example, the moment you go medium to dark roast, I don't want to get above 80 to 82 degrees Celsius.
Definitely.
As a personal preference. Also saying, not that I wouldn't experiment above it, but I wouldn't necessarily take above 82 as my safe zone, because I know that it's much easier to get that better element out of the coffee.
Yeah, and because we're not a fan of that slightly more heavier, darker type of roastiness, let's call it the roastiness, extracting the roastiness from the coffee, because we're not a big fan of that roasty elements, we just prefer to completely stay away from it.
Yeah.
We're not smokers and have never been, so
yes,
prefer to have sweet, nice, bright, acidic things, which this cup is definitely. Now, even though knowing the coffee is so old, I wouldn't have said it up until this point.
Yes.
Now, as it's starting to cool down, I'm getting that woodiness in the back of the cheeks. So if I had to finish this cup fairly hot, like in the last 12 minutes, if I had to have finished this cup already, I wouldn't have never known that this was coffee, that this coffee was old.
But also, I would also say that now, yes, it does get a little bit of that woodiness being that old, but it was extremely complex when we started tasting, so it was a beautiful tasting coffee. But if it did sustain that level of complexity straight through the cup, it would not necessarily be an enjoyable drinking coffee.
Right.
Because you would consistently kind of fall back into identifying that very complex acidity and sweetness and combination, whereas now it actually calms down quite a bit. So it still has that little bit of a stone fruit acidity, but it comes more towards the center of the tongue, gets a kind of raisiny element to it.
Raisiny and very citrus-like. I'm almost getting like an orange zestiness.
Yeah.
From the acidity to the umami of the tongue, which is very interesting. Like, I'm not a big fan of orange, per se, because of the fact that I'm actually allergic to orange.
Yes.
Because of the way that bees pollinate them, apparently. There's something in it that my body doesn't like. So I don't really do oranges at all. But this is a very interesting, that zestiness from the orange, which I'm actually enjoying.
Yes.
And the stone fruit's hovering there, man, like so much.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
And so very interesting element in the coffee. And what Theo and I discussed a while back, what we found a lot, especially when we go to coffee shops, and then we ask them, okay, listen, so we ask questions about the coffee like we always do.
Yes.
And we hope, obviously, that you ask questions about the coffee, and then the barista gives you a passionate answer that is actually knowledge-filled and inspired. And obviously, that's not necessarily the norm. Okay, depending on where you are, it might be. And if that is, that's amazing. For us, at the moment, it's not really.
Yeah.
Also then saying that many of the baristas that we ask, listen, what kind of coffee do you serve? And even if they do give a satisfactory answer, if we then actually ask them, listen, okay, so what does it taste like? They don't know.
They don't know, because baristas, and sadly, hopefully just in South Africa, but baristas don't experiment and taste their own coffees.
And also, but let's just give some context to that. A lot of the baristas that we meet work at coffee shops or at cafes where they're not allowed to taste the coffee.
This is sad. This is really sad to me, because some of the coffee shop owners are like, no, you're drinking my profit. I'm like, guy, he wants to serve a good cup of coffee to your clients to get them coming back. You don't want them to taste your coffee. How on earth are they supposed to know what they're serving?
And
it's sad.
So the first time that I actually walked into a shop, and this was long before I had 3% of the knowledge that I have now. So also, once again, acknowledging what we have to learn. I mean, we know absolutely nothing. But
yeah, for sure.
Walking into a shop, spending time with somebody who has, in the meantime, become one of my best friends, and who started teaching me about coffee with regards to espresso, and then him trying to teach me how to calibrate their grinder. And I have to be honest, the grinder, even though I can't remember exactly what the brand was extremely, extremely sensitive to adjustment. And he said, okay, listen. And I said, okay, cool, but you know what? I want to calibrate in 2 shots. Otherwise, I'm wasting a lot of coffee, and we're losing money. The owner, listening to this, now a very good friend of ours as well, walks in. He says, no, you're not. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, the fact that you're willing to experiment with the coffee, even let's say, for example, if you had to grind away at 1 kg of coffee. Now, a coffee professional and a coffee drinker immediately knows kg of coffee, not even just with regards to price, that's a lot of coffee.
Yes, that's a good salary.
But they're making the statement that, and you find, even if you ground a 1 kilogram of coffee away, but you found a recipe that is better,
works, yes,
or that is different that we can use, and that brings in money, or that brings in satisfaction, we've already succeeded.
Exactly.
And the fact that we could then go and we could taste a lot of coffee, and then they'd say, okay, cool, you know what, we have used quite a lot of coffee and milk today, so let's just tone it down a little bit. But giving your baristas that freedom, them being allowed to taste it. Think, for example, about Lucky, right?
Yes.
For somebody who believes that caffeine keeps him awake, he drinks a ristretto at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right before he has to start doing stock taking, cleaning up the shop and so on.
He needs that bit of a kick, you know.
But he recalibrates the grinder how many times? Now, I have to be honest, I don't know if he drinks the espresso because he needed to calibrate, or he calibrated because he wanted the espresso.
Who knows?
But regardless, the fact that he is calibrating as much as he is amazing, because we know consistently what's happening in our shop.
Exactly.
But this now being my point, if a coffee shop owner or manager does not allow their barista to taste the coffee, that means that there's no room for experimentation, because they don't even know where to start.
Exactly.
And we interviewed someone this week who believed that they calibrated the grinder, but they had absolutely no idea what the result was.
And they would calibrate 3 times a day.
Yes, but they had no idea, first of all, where they were, and they never knew where they ended up.
Yes.
So I would think that the consistency in the cup was not too great, but
well, from personal experience, I can tell you it's not too great, and we never want to diss any brand, so I would never mention the brand. But I mean, he was like, when we asked him the question in the interview, how much coffee did you use? He said, no, well, you know, they consistently calibrate 3 times a day. It's between 18 and 20 grams in, and I'm going 2 grams difference.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
Between 18 and 20 grams. That's quite a big difference if you think about dosage,
difference.
Not as yield.
Yeah, that's dose. And then he pulls the shot for between 25 and 30 seconds, not really knowing how much coffee he's pulling out, because he ended up between 25 and 30 seconds. He's happy with the fact that he's inside that calibration of what they were using. So completely inconsistent compared to someone who uses a scale, at the same time creating some type of consistency, obviously, for their coffee. So it's not right nor wrong, it's just different.
Yes. And sorry.
Yeah, but just consistency, man. Like, that's a huge difference in flavor.
And now, this being the point, the fact that they had no idea necessarily where they were, and first of all, did not even necessarily like their own coffee. And how often do we meet baristas that don't like their own coffee because it's bitter?
Yes.
Now, okay, if it's bitter, why would you even serve it to someone else?
Yes.
So not even knowing what it tastes like, could never experiment with a flavor. And we have found some of the most insane flavors in coffees just by doing a little bit experimentation.
Right. Unfortunately, you have to waste that money to actually learn from it. We
And
call it school fees.
And also, it's not even necessarily a waste. For example, one of my experiments on a coffee that I would not normally experiment with yielded the cup that we had on our last episode.
Yes.
It was that Red Bourbon Peaberry from Burundi,
Man.
which I experimented with going a little bit finer in grind, going a lot cooler than I normally would in temperature, and actually had a phenomenal result.
Oh my word.
I mean, a cup that you were willing to finish, which to
For
me,
sure.
massive compliment.
And would finish every other time you make that same cup for me, because that is just, I can still, just closing my eyes and thinking about it, I can still taste that coffee in my mouth, man. Sweet, sour strawberries with this gorgeous, gorgeous ruby grapefruit in the back. It is so beautiful.
Now, also saying that as we finished the episode and we stopped recording, Theo puts the glass down with a little bit of coffee that he has left, and he's like, "Don't throw that away. I'm coming back for it."
Do not touch my glass.
which is amazing. And also had other experiments on coffees where we played with grind and temperature, and it really did not yield a great result. It wasn't great flavor. It became a little bit astringent. So experimentation then showing us, okay, cool, this coffee doesn't respond in this way.
Yes.
But to use a very good example, we actually mentioned this coffee, I think, about 5 or 6 episodes ago when we talked about, it was in the brewing.
Yes.
The brewing episode.
Brewing
we
or the
talked
ratios?
No, brewing.
In the brewing one.
Because
okay, cool.
we talked about the Chemex that tasted like cream soda.
Oh,
because
yes.
we were willing to experiment.
A grade 1 coffee, yes.
Yes. So this was a heirloom grade 1 from the Yirgacheffe region in Ethiopia. And our safe zone for that coffee normally was 4 minutes 45 seconds, about 86 to 88 degrees Celsius, and we would play 4 minutes 30 seconds. And we would actually pull it in a V60 because, you know, the V60 allows more of the oil through than the Chemex does, so it kind of gives you that little bit of a body, highlighting those vanilla elements, bringing a citrusy element, that beautiful blossom on the tip of the tongue.
Yeah.
So you get those beautiful flavors. And so I just decided one day, you know what would happen if we go very coarse on it, almost, I would say, about as coarse as we did with the Kalita, and then going down to 80 degrees Celsius or 82 degrees Celsius, and then pulling it for as long as possible. Now,
and you did stretch that cup.
And I really did stretch that cup, never allowing the bed to be dry, but really stretching that cup to, I think I pulled out 8 minutes 34 seconds. Now, saying, I know that I can replicate that cup again, and I would actually refine that quite a little bit.
Yes. He has perfected that cup, by the way.
Yes, we have played with that recipe enough to do that.
And it was freaking amazing. Now, the time on that coffee
was about 8 minutes 34 seconds.
I mean, imagine a coffee pulling for almost 10 minutes.
And immediately you would think, oh my goodness,
that must have been horrible.
The bitterness in that cup. And it really was not. And what an experiment that in the coffee tastings that we did, private and public tastings, and when we had people visit our shop, especially when we get into a conversation about grind size and temperature, this is one of the first coffees that we choose to make them. And which is so amazing is this is not a high point specialty coffee.
No.
It's not something that you immediately think, okay, yeah, but you know, it's a really good coffee. It's supposed to have good flavor. It's supposed to be that easy to get flavor out of it. And it's not the case. I think it's a 79 or 81 point coffee.
Yeah, 80 to 81. So it's a heirloom, so we're not even 100% certain what's in there. And the roast profile is, fairly simplistic. It's a minute 30 seconds after first crack.
And this coffee was initially roasted to actually be able to serve people a good cup of coffee that would not make them poor, that it wouldn't take all of the money that they had for coffee for that month, and also that they would be easy to kind of make at home. So you can make it in quite a few different methods, getting different flavors out of it. But now taking a coffee, pulling 8.5 minutes on it, bringing the temperature down quite a bit, and it brought out such beautiful elements of vanilla,
sweetness, man, that
we got so much sugar out of it, and so a completely different combination of flavors that Theo, who doesn't touch carbonated drinks, by the way,
or haven't in many years.
Yeah, like he hasn't touched carbonated drinks in many years. Tastes it and says, this reminds me of when I had cream soda as a kid.
Yes.
And I looked at him so shocked. I was like, no, that's not what cream soda tastes like. He's like, no, you know when you take cream soda, and maybe you've done this before, you take cream soda, you drink most of it, or you have that little bit left in the bottle, and it kind of stands for a day or two, and then you throw it into your glass. Obviously, it's flat.
Yes.
All the gas is gone, and you take that sip, and yes, it's flat, but you got that vanilla element in the cream soda flavor.
An apricotish, vanilla-ish type of weird element. It was freaking insane. Man.
And then tasting this in a coffee, going back, making it again, and finding this flavor. And what a shock to experiment with something that when I met you, I would thought was a massive taboo in coffee. Like, you don't go over, when I met you, you didn't go over 3 minutes in coffee, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then you told me, listen, you're not even getting into flavor at all. And you use that exact same coffee to kind of prove your point.
Yes. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that yoga chef.
Oh, I actually went to the extreme. I pulled him a 1-to, I think it was a 1-to-10 ratio.
Yeah.
Just to kind of get this interesting element of, flavor and sweetness from the cup. Probably about 4 minute 20 seconds. And we sit and we enjoy the cup. And I go courageously going, so Tian, have you ever tasted a second pour? And he looked at me stunned. He was like,
so if you're on the other the opposite end of this podcast, and you hear the term second pour, and you already start to kind of, reverse, and you're doing a little bit of a backtrack, don't worry, I felt the same way. I thought to myself, how do you pour through coffee and a filter a second time and expect anything? Like, we don't do that, all right? That's some other blasphemy that you just try to pull in this coffee, community society. And I have to tell you,
what sin are you doing here?
That I had to be the one who repented, because just his experiment on going back to the cup. Now it had cooled down a little bit, but you essentially stretching the time, stretching that ratio, and then we only tasted what was left.
Only the sweetness.
So the sweetness that was left in the cup, not getting to the bitterness yet, but then taking obviously the 2 different coffees that we extracted, using a clean glass, and then mixing it and finding how it could have worked and finding a completely different flavor.
Yes.
So a very unorthodox thing to do. So if you're taking a look at your coffee, or you're listening to this and you think, listen, one temperature and is fine. James Hoffman has an interesting perspective on the temperature that he chooses to use. Now in South Africa, our weather is not nearly as cold as James.
No. London is cold. South Africa is not exactly.
So I wouldn't go boiling water because it stays hot way too long here.
Way too long. Also, our air pressure, it densifies the air so much that our water here in Pretoria, South Africa, starts boiling at 90 to 91 degrees Celsius. I would never take it all the way up to 96 or 97 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it wouldn't even work. I would have nothing left in the kettle by the time it gets there.
Yeah, my kettle just switches off by itself. I'll never get up there.
We're thinking about the grind size that you have set, even on espresso even. Let's say your preferred is 26 seconds on an espresso shot.
Right.
But you go a little bit finer or a little bit coarser, bringing it down to 20 seconds. Or even if you prefer to do a very light tap, going a lot coarser, putting in a little bit more pressure, obviously being able to recreate it consistently, and then pulling a 21, 22 second shot, you're going to find a completely different element of flavor.
Right.
Depending obviously on the coffee that you're using, I think you're going to have a complete change in acidity. You're going to have a completely different sweetness, and it's going to bring a different kind of balance to that cup.
Well, you just brought a very interesting memory to my mind. Remember when we just started training, and we actually went to one of the stores that's closed now, and we took out the coffee machine, we set up the whole thing. We're like, okay, officially training, intense training is starting today.
This was when Given and I were both there for training. Right. My goodness.
So I take out an F6 red honey processed coffee, and I throw it through an espresso, like a Milkunig grinder, and I'm going, right, we're going to start pulling some interesting shots with espresso.
Oh man, I still have nightmares about the shots you had me pull.
I would tell him to pull a shot, and in his mind, not having much experience or experimenting on espressos, because he was more a V60 man back then.
And also, I did not have an espresso machine. I was I was a youth pastor before this, so I had no experience in a professional coffee environment, and I knew that an espresso machine used a lot of pressure and had some very cool buttons. That was about it.
Yeah, that was about it. And I told him, okay, you pull me this shot, you pull me this shot. Okay, now go a lot coarser. And he was like, what? You want to go? You're just gonna screw up this coffee. And I was like, okay, just pull the shot. But the only way we'll ever know whether this shot's going to be horrible or not is by tasting it.
Yes.
And I would then let him pull the shot, take the puck out. We'll analyze the puck. We'll see that obviously there was no channeling. The puck actually extracted nicely. And I'd say to him, okay, what do you guys think this shot is going to taste like? And they would give a perspective of their thought around that specific shot.
Yeah.
Then they would taste them, and I would just sit and look at their faces, finding the most insane responses, because we've never really thought about coffee that way.
And just to explain, so for example, not being cryptic, but to give you one of the shots that he had us pull, after going to the ratios that we kind of knew as our safe spaces,
yes.
He said, okay, you know what? You're going to go a lot coarser on your grind, and you need to pull me, I think it was like a 1:8 ratio or something. We touched 90 mils on espresso, and you have to finish it in like 16 seconds.
Yes.
It was... Immediately I told him, listen, you're going to take one of my favorite coffees and you're going to mess this thing up. And he said, like, hey, how do you know? I said, well, I just know. He said, well, okay.
Let's try it.
You're going to do it, and then we're going to taste it. And afterwards, you're going to tell me, I'm sorry, you were right. and at the time, I thought, you arrogant guy. My goodness, I'm not that much of a noob in the coffee space. And I looked him in the eyes after I tasted it and said, you know what, you're right. I was wrong. I'm sorry.
And the only reason why I could do that to you is because I started experimenting around these small scientific factors because of a guy called Matthew Perga.
Yes.
If it wasn't for Matt at that point in time, I would have never in my life thought to do something like that with coffee.
Yes.
But my goodness, was that insane.
Now, also saying, does this work on every coffee? No.
Would I never do a second pour if it wasn't that yoga shit.
And also, would I serve something like that espresso shot to a client? Not necessarily.
No, because they wouldn't appreciate that.
Well, also, they would think to themselves, what the heck is coming out of this espresso machine? That thing is running a marathon.
Yes.
In a very short time, and the color is different. So, also, you would need a very special kind of person to be willing to actually taste this. Somebody who's adventurous in what they like. And we do appreciate that from people, because we actually get the opportunity to play with a lot of things and get honest perspective.
Yes.
Obviously, because we still have a prejudice when we go into experimenting coffee with coffee. So we have a few clients that we call. So listen, we're going to start tasting coffee in 25 minutes. We have a bunch of experiments that we need to do. And we actually have clients who drive, 25 kilometers to come join us. And how they do that in 25 minutes, I hope that they do it safe and that,
every time.
or that the police doesn't catch them, even if they don't. But the fact that they get there and then they take the coffee with us and we kind of share this coffee journey. But we have found some of the best flavors, and also some of the best conversations with people were opened up because we were willing to experiment with something really, really crazy.
Right.
I mean, if you have a set grind, let's say, for example, you're using a Hario grinder, the Hario V60 grinder, and they recommend a 15 grind on V60 with new burrs, obviously.
Yes.
Ours are
it's got a few kgs
old.
through it. Yes.
We can go a bit finer. But I, for example, frustrate a lot of people or confuse a lot of people because I never even go to 15, even on our older burrs. I immediately go to 20 or to 25, which is obviously very, very coarse. and I adjust water temperature and I play with it because I like that sweetness and acidity, and I don't necessarily enjoy too much of the umami or bitterness element.
That's it.
And when I make coffee for people and they're willing to experiment, I want to give them a completely different experience, something that they've never had before. And to give this is a very, very good example. I did a private coffee tasting for a couple this week.
Yes.
It was on Sunday afternoon. And to be honest, I was a little bit concerned. I thought to myself, my goodness, what if I spend 2.5 hours with these people and they do not even appreciate the effort and the time that goes into this? And so they get there, sit down, and it sounds, I think often it sounds like I'm very confident in communicating with the random and new people, but really I'm not. I am such an introvert, and I know that you won't believe me, but I really am such an introvert.
He just has a big mouth.
But meeting them, spending 2 hours with them, tasting a bunch of coffee, and really trying to do very funny things. And I'm also saying on the first cup of coffee that we used, which is a Kachere variety from the Yirgacheffe region in Ethiopia, wasn't their favorite cup, which is fine. They're cappuccino drinkers. They like...
Oh yeah, they would not have loved that very much.
But the appreciation for what the coffee was. So even though they said, listen, this is not our favorite cup, but this is unlike anything that we've ever tasted before. And it opened up conversations to such a degree that I actually tried to call Theo and Melissa, who obviously run the business, to give them feedback, and accidentally called me. But said, listen, okay, cool. We wanted to speak to your bosses, but we just wanted to tell you again, thank you. We had such an amazing time. We had a brand new perspective. We have a completely different appreciation for coffee.
Yeah.
And we so appreciated spending that time with you, which to me, the fact that they said, we love spending time with you and we enjoyed the time we spent, that to me, even yes, if the coffee was great, that's phenomenal. But the fact that the interaction was that good.
The people, man.
And we experimented. We didn't take any traditional approaches on the coffee.
On anything.
We played with funny grind sizes through a clever method. So obviously a kind of submersion pour over mix between the two. We pulled long ratios. We played with grind size and temperature for people who normally drink a little bit of instant coffee at home and
love cappuccinos.
Yeah. I mean, the gentleman only drank about 3.5-4 cups of coffee a day on average, just because he's that busy. His wife drinks 15 cups of coffee. That's her main source of liquid that she takes. She doesn't even drink water. She does. She adds it to her coffee and then she drinks it. But
she drinks colored water.
Yes. But so obviously people who love coffee and who know so much what they like and know so much in regards to what they like and how to get what they like, being willing to experiment, getting a completely different new perspective.
That's it. Now, just some feedback for you, because you obviously haven't seen. They did promise to go and write a fantastic review on Google for us, for the coffee tasting, and they did. They went and they wrote probably a 20 to 30 line review on how phenomenal it was and how fantastic the interaction between the barista and for the coffee tasting, and how informative it was and how much they really, really appreciated it. And so for you guys out there listening, if you are a barista and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but the clients always annoy me and this and that, trust me, even though you think that you're irritating them or whatever, they actually do appreciate the time that you try to put aside to spend that extra 2 to 3 minutes just to kind of explain to them how much this coffee means to you.
Yeah.
And it matters, even though it sometimes doesn't feel like it does. But it does matter.
Yes.
So take the time, really try and set a bit of energy towards your clients and just explain to them your appreciation for the cup that they're drinking. It completely revolutionizes the way they look at coffee.
And also, experimenting with your coffee. Or let me rephrase it. Not experimenting with your coffee. You're doing such a disservice to yourself and to your client.
Yes.
Because how do we know, even us, how do we know that we have found the perfect recipe for our coffee and for our clients? None of our clients have the same palate. Now, a large percentage of our clients are cappuccino drinkers, but if you get down to to the, where the cookie crumbles, where the tire hits the pavement.
Yes.
Each and every one of our clients' palates are different, and the more we expand our knowledge on how this client it enjoys a little bit of astringency, which I don't actually find normal, but I actually know people that like a little bit of astringency in coffee, which means for them I go a little bit coarser, I don't get into the coffee as much, and they appreciate that coffee more than they would my traditional style of brewing.
Right.
Or going a little bit colder, or even going a little bit coarser and hotter to get sweetness out, to get more of the sugars released in a quicker time, but not getting to the bitterness as much. And some of them like bitterness. And if your coffee has, for example, a grapefruit bitterness and you want to highlight that, fantastic.
Yes.
Play with temperature, play with grind size. It's going to give you something that's different.
Well, I think I've mentioned on this podcast, the client that walks into our shop sometimes 3 to 4 times a week,
Lungo
and he asks for a Lungo cappuccino.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
He came to a coffee tasting and he was like, okay, cool, I find these coffees interesting. Okay, thank you, Tian, there for the nice wake-up call. He enjoys all of the coffees that we tasted, but he kind of likes the commercial bitter cup. And so he would appreciate that type of flavor inside his coffee slightly more often.
Yes.
So like, fantastic. The coffee tastings that we do is specifically for you to find out what you like, what you dislike,
yes,
how to get what you like, and how to stay away from what you don't. And so he was like, okay, so well, what do I order? So we said, okay, we did a little intro thing, on 3 or 4 different cappuccinos, gave it to him to taste, and he found the Lungo cappuccino. Now, when I say Lungo cappuccino, because we know the client, when he walks in, we grind normal coffee.
Yeah.
So we don't change our grind size. We just go and put a little bit of muscle into the tamp. Like, we put enough pressure on that tamp to kind of stretch the 20 to 22 seconds, that we use for our extractions on espressos,
yes,
to get it to about 28, maybe 32 seconds.
And then obviously stretching the ratio as well.
Pulling the ratio, yes, really getting into that bean to take the bitterness, like from the center of the bean into the cup with the heating of the portafilter head, to really pull some proper bitterness into his cappuccino.
And also saying immediately, if you're thinking, oh, but if it's that bitter, he's going to want to add sugar. In fact,
he prefers it without sugar.
That one he prefers without sugar. My normal cappuccino, he used to add sugar.
Yes.
So now he doesn't even add sugar. So the bitterness for him with the milk, obviously, it works.
Yes. He loves it.
And if that's what your client enjoys, and you don't have to, let's say, if you have a coffee philosophy or whatever, and you don't have to sacrifice on that, but you can still give your clients, just by knowing your coffee and having experimented enough, that you have a capable barista or are a capable barista, and you can change 1 or 2 elements in your extraction or recipe to give your client a better flavor for them. Phenomenal.
Yes. Which brings us to the first question. Why is this information important? And I will personally say this information is important for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, for you to be able to experiment more often when you're by yourself.
Yeah.
But I think the more important factor is that when you walk into your favorite local coffee shop, or into a coffee shop, by an airport, because you travel quite a bit, to walk up to the bar and go, hey barista, I would prefer the following shot. Now you're challenging the way your barista thinks about coffee. Now, his life is very mundane. He pitches up every single morning, he calibrates his machine, he pulls this brown liquid thing, and he tries to serve to his client something as consistent as possible as he can.
Yeah.
Now you walk up to the bar and you go, okay, excellent, I've just tasted this, and I really appreciate the fact that you made me this cup. But I kind of like something different.
Yeah.
Would you please do me the following? And you challenge your barista with going finer or coarser, or tamping harder or tamping softer, because you have experimented with your coffee, knowing what effect you will get from the coffee.
Yeah.
You have just changed or revolutionized his whole life.
Yes.
Because his job is the same thing every single day, trying to get consistency. Now you come in and you make him think about coffee differently. I promise you he's going to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just because you took some information from a podcast with a bunch of weirdos that don't really know much and they chat about these weird things because they experiment quite a bit, and you completely give a different perspective to your barista in your local coffee shop.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's why this information is important.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Tian, how do you think this can make your coffee better?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that we are willing to bring out new flavors, because it will change the flavor. And if you are, first of all, a coffee professional, you're gonna give your clients or the people that you make coffee for, even if it's just your family, a different experience. You're gonna give them a different flavor, and you're gonna kind of open up their world as well. Share a little bit of your passion just by that little bit of experimentation.
Yes.
And if you're a client and your barista is doing this for you, or you go to them, you're gonna completely open up a new conversation. You're gonna get to know your barista on a different level, and you might actually get to that place where your favorite coffee shop or even the restaurant that you're at serves a better cup of coffee because you are willing to have a conversation with them. Now, also not judging them or bashing them with a bunch of knowledge, because
yes.
that is
That's
not
so
going to help.
unnecessary.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
that doesn't make coffee better, and that doesn't add value.
Yes.
We want to add value.
But having an experimental session, and also then being willing, and I appreciate this about people, and we try to do this. If we go to a shop and we ask them to experiment, I pay them for each shot that they pull. In fact, I'm willing to pay for the shot that the barista is going to taste, because I want him to taste what is different.
Exactly.
Because, like we said in our conversation, some people don't allow their baristas to taste their own coffee.
Yes.
So I would then rather go and I would pay for that person's coffee, because that's going to make that person more passionate. They're going to get into what they enjoy more, and that means that they will be able to serve someone else a better, and I will almost say a happier cup, because
yes,
you get so excited about experimenting with something new and serving somebody something that is different, just as good or even better, but different.
That's it.
And then, Theo, I think when we get to the question about how do we make this practical, it is very, very simple.
Yes.
Change your grind size.
Take one coffee.
Yes.
Start at a, let's call it AeroPress grind. Finish off at a percolator grind.
Yes.
Through the same method, keeping the same temperature. Seeing what the coffee does.
Yeah.
Then, let's go the opposite direction. Taking the grind size you know. Starting nice and hot, pouring different shots at different temperatures.
Yes.
And physically getting your favorite cup from two simple, we would think, unimportant factors.
Yes.
Temperature and grind size.
So, when you get new flavors, or you see that smile light up on somebody's face, or you have the opportunity to see someone respond the way that I had the privilege of seeing Theo respond with his favorite coffee, finding a recipe that worked in an experiment that could have gone horribly wrong with a very expensive coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But
worth the shot, man.
May you find that you're adding value to someone else's life and experience, and also taking back to the previous episode, that by experimenting you may actually find a flavor that a farmer or a producer put into a coffee that you would never have tasted if you were not willing to kind of pioneer in that way.
Yes.
So
going outside of your comfort zone and what you thought was always the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we greet you at the end of this episode, may you make great coffee and may you have horrible coffee. May you find what you don't enjoy and know how to stay away from it.
Yes.
And when you find that good cup, whether you make it for someone or they make it for you, may you slow down, enjoy it, and actually share your experience with the person in front of you.
That's it.
Because what good is it to find your happy place in a cup when you have to find it by yourself?
That would be so boring.
So may you, with the people in front of you, find your happy place in every single cup.
That's it. Now, I just want to add, I know we never do this. This is an extra add-on. I like to always say, you can never really appreciate a good cup until you can compare it to a bad one.
That is a fact.
So guys, we'll chat to you on the next episode. Hope this was informative. See you guys soon. Cheers.
Cheers.